Hi, this is part 4 of reading Galatians. And we've been working through Paul's letter to the Galatians. And our last session was about Paul trying to explain the promises made to Abraham and to his offspring. The way he argues that is a reference to Christ and not to his earthly descendants, in the sense of all the Israelites, and also about the covenant that God made with Abraham, the promises that he made, and how we, because we are in Christ, are now inheritors of those promises. And he tries to explain what the purpose of the law was. It was there to increase transgressions. It was there to be a disciplinarian. It was there to tutor us. But it was a weaker system than the promises made and righteousness by faith. And so we should not fall back into those basic principles that the law had. We should remain free in the grace that God has given us in Jesus Christ. Well, that's in a nutshell what we talked about last time. There is a continuation of his argument about the two covenants, and it's an allegory. And it begins in chapter 4, verse 21. And what I want to do in this section, and this section shouldn't be as long as the others, I just want to work through this allegory. It follows on naturally, as Paul is trying to dissociate the covenant of a promise made to Abraham from the covenant of law made to Moses. So now in verse 21, tell me, you who desire to be subject to the law, will you not listen to the law? So at this point, he is very specific. He says, you want to be subject to the law? You want to go into Judaism and be circumcised and follow all the laws of Judaism? Listen to the law. And now, as he talks about the law, he's talking about the Old Testament scriptures in general. He's not talking about the Ten Commandments or even about those prescriptive passages in the Torah, but about all of the Old Testament passages that can be grouped together as the law, including the stories that are told in the Torah, in Genesis. So, will you not listen to the law? For it is written that Abraham had two sons. All right, so he's going to go to the story about Abraham's two sons, and he's going to talk about those, and that's within the Torah. That's the two sons, Isaac and Ishmael, are talked about in Genesis 16 and in Genesis 21, and some passages sprinkled in between there. So that's in the Torah. He says, so Abraham had two sons, one by a slave woman and one by a free woman. One, the child of the slave, was born according to the flesh. The other, the child of the free woman, was born through the promise. Now, he expects his readers to know this story, so he doesn't go into a whole lot of detail. But the story is basically that Abraham was getting old. He had received the promise from God that he would have a son, and that God would bless him, and he would have many, many descendants. But he was getting old, and Sarah was getting very old, his wife, and Sarah finally decided, well, maybe Abraham is supposed to have a child by my servant, Hagar. So Hagar was a handmaid that was a servant of Sarah. So Abraham had relations with Hagar, and Hagar became pregnant, and Hagar had a son, and his name was Ishmael. So that is the first son, the son that was born according to the flesh. And that simply means according to the natural way that people have children. It's not a negative statement. It's just saying that that's just in the course of nature, that that's the way that child was born. And it wasn't all that unusual in those days for men to have more than one wife, and for men sometimes to have children by handmaidens who were not their wives. So it's not a judgment against Hagar and Ishmael. It's just saying that Ishmael was born according to nature, according to the flesh, the normal course of things. But the other was the child of the free woman, was born through promise. So the other child, as the story goes on, God came to Abraham and said, Sarah will have a child. And Sarah overheard that and laughed about it because she was getting very old now. It's been a long time since she was capable of having any children. But God performed a miracle, and Sarah became pregnant. And the child that was born when they were up in their 90s was Isaac. So Isaac was a child of promise. And this wasn't according to sort of the natural way that children are born, because this was kind of contrary to nature. They were too old to have children. But so one child of Abraham was born in the natural way through a slave woman, and the other was born by promise, sort of a miracle, really, that Sarah was able to have a child. So he had these two sons. Then Paul goes on in verse 24 to say, now, this is an allegory. So it says, this is an allegory. I'm going to tell you what these women and these children mean. They stand for something. It's an allegory in a special kind of allegory. It's a type. Now, typology in the Bible is based on the notion that the patterns of the divine history repeat themselves over and over again. According to F. Bruce, that's one way to look at what a type is. So the story of the two sons of Abraham is a type. They point to something spiritual. The antitype is the reality. That's what they stand for. And so he's going to say, all right, now, these allegorical characters stand for this in spiritual reality. These two women are covenants. All right, so the two women, Hagar and Sarah, are covenants. One woman, in fact, is Hagar from Mount Sinai, bearing children for slavery. So Hagar is supposed to be the covenant that God gave to Moses at Mount Sinai. And that covenant has produced a lot of children, as it were, but they're all born into slavery because they're all born into the law. The covenant given at Mount Sinai to Moses was the covenant of law. Now, Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia and corresponds to the present Jerusalem, for she is in slavery with her children. So he says, all right, Hagar stands first of all for the covenant given at Mount Sinai, and that covenant stands for the covenant for the present Jerusalem. And by Jerusalem, the present Jerusalem, he's not talking so much about the physical place, other than that it is the center of Judaism. So we have Hagar as the covenant given at Mount Sinai, and it corresponds to Judaism, which center is in the present day Jerusalem. Those three things line up together, all under Hagar, or Hagar and the other two line up together. Now, Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia and corresponds to the present Jerusalem, for she is in slavery to her children. Going on to verse 26. But the other woman corresponds to the Jerusalem above. She is free, and she is our mother. All right, the other woman, which is Sarah, he doesn't call her Sarah right now, but we know that there's Hagar and then there's Sarah. And he says that this other woman, in the allegory typology, the other woman corresponds to the Jerusalem above. And so what we have is a contrast between the present Jerusalem, which is the center of Judaism, there in about 50 AD, the present Jerusalem, and that's associated with Hagar and the law. The other woman is associated with the Jerusalem above, the heavenly Jerusalem. And so the earthly Jerusalem and the heavenly Jerusalem are not the same thing. One is Hagar, one is Sarah. Okay? And the one above is free, and she is our mother, those of us who live by faith. For it is written, and here he quotes Isaiah 54, I believe it's verse 1. And the quote goes this way: Rejoice, you childless one, you who bear no children. Burst into song and shout, you who endure no birth pangs. For the children of the desolate woman are more numerous than the children of one who is married. Now, this quotation out of Isaiah 54 is a prophecy that the desolate woman, those who have not been able to have children, and in our typology, our allegory, the pagans, the Gentiles, had been sterile spiritually. They had not been producing the children of God. And so it's like Sarah, who was sterile and couldn't have children. But now we get these two things put together, and there is this prophecy in Isaiah 54 that says, "Rejoice, you childless one, Sarah, and those who have not been producing fruit for God, which is the heavenly Jerusalem." The Gentiles who are now part of the heavenly Jerusalem, and anybody else, the Jews too, who are part of the heavenly Jerusalem. You who bear no children, burst forth in song and shout, you who endure no birth pangs. So you've had this sterile background. For the children of the desolate woman are more numerous than the children of the one who is married. And so here there's this promise of great abundance of many children coming to the Jerusalem above, to the heavenly Jerusalem, which of course is this second covenant. The first covenant is Sinai, the second covenant is promise. In verse 28, now you, my friends, are children of the promise, like Isaac. And he's been telling us all along that those who believe become the children of promise, just like Abraham believed and received the promise. So now, my friends, you are the children of promise like Isaac. But just as at that time the child who was born according to the flesh persecuted the child who was born according to the Spirit, so it is now. Well, the story back in Genesis says that as after Isaac was born, and at the time that he was weaned, he was a toddler probably at this time, Ishmael was playing with Isaac, and Sarah saw it, and something about that play really bothered her. Whether she was afraid that Abraham, who loved Ishmael very much, would prefer Ishmael over Isaac, or whether Ishmael was playing in an inappropriate way with Isaac, or whether he might have been mocking Isaac. We don't know what it was. It just says he was playing with him. But Sarah became jealous in some way. Excuse me. Sarah became jealous in some way and told Abraham she wanted that child and her mother to be sent away out of the camp, out of the large camp that Abraham had, his family and all of his servants and so on. We do know that Hagar had been kind of proud and uppity in relationship to Sarah before Sarah had the child. So what does it say? What does the scripture say about this incident? It says, drive out the slave and her child, for the child and the slave will not share the inheritance with the child of the free woman. God actually agreed with Sarah and told Abraham to go ahead and send Hagar and Ishmael away. And at the same time, he promised that he would take care of Ishmael, and Ishmael would have a lot of children. But he was not the son who was to inherit the promise. The line of promise was not to come through Ishmael. It was to come through Isaac. So then, friends, we are children, but not of the slave, but of the free woman. So we are the spiritual descendants of Abraham. Now that's what he is saying in this allegory. It's it's a allegory that goes against uh, what would normally be considered the straightforward interpretation of what happened with Hagar and Sarah. The typical Jewish interpretation of that at the time would have been that the children of Hagar and Ishmael, the, those are the Gentiles, and the children of Sarah, Isaac, those children are the Jews. And so the children of Sarah are the Jews, and the children of Hagar are the Gentiles. But what does Paul do here? He actually inverts that typology, and he says, no, the children of Hagar are the children of the law, and that is present Jerusalem, that is present Judaism. Whereas the children of Sarah are the children of promise, and those are those who believe, and so receive the promise. And many of those, and an increasing number, more and more of them, are Gentiles and not Jews. So this allegory kind of goes against the traditional way that Jews would have of interpreting what happened with Sarah and Hagar. Now, verse 1 of chapter 5 can be read as sort of the conclusion of the allegory or the beginning of the next section. So it says, "For freedom Christ has set us free. Stand firm, therefore, and do not submit again to a yoke of slavery. You have been set free. You are children of the free woman, and there is freedom in the promise. You are free from all the burdens of the law. You don't have the yoke of the law on you anymore. So stand firm in that, and don't let yourself come under the yoke of the law now that you have been set free." Well, I'm going to stop there. I just wanted to get through this allegory in this part, and then we'll go on as Paul talks more about freedom and how important it is to stay in freedom. But that's it for this one. It's been good talking with you. Bye now.